one thing about the class of 1963. When freshmen, they were the last freshman class for the Bloomsburg State Teachers College. In January of 1960, they're starting their second semester, we became Bloomsburg State College.
My freshman year, it was $65 a semester. I think it was my junior year, they raised it from $65 a semester to $75 a semester. And we went on strike. We had a big protest, and when we marched on the president's house because we thought that was an outlandish amount of increase. And room and board was $235 a semester, but also minimum wage was $1. And there were no student loans. There were no athletic scholarships. We had jobs. And my first job was in the dish room in the Commons. I basically was, as a freshman, there was a pecking order on the jobs, and my first job was scraping dishes off. So it was a little different ballgame.
One of the traditions that we had was May Day. In 1910 they started this, but the final one was in the spring of 1963. The class of 63 had the final one. This is where they would crown a Queen of May. They would have dances. It was a way of just celebrating spring. But a second tradition that they had here was during commencement week. They would have what they called Ivy Day. 1963 was the next to last year, but the focus of it was to plant some ivy next to a building so that the ivy would grow up the side of the building and create the ivy-covered halls of academia. So the early 60s here were these old traditions that had been gone back to almost the beginning of the century were phased out. The campus was growing, the student body was growing. And so we added new faculty. We had 18 new faculty that year. 11 were in brand new positions. Our enrollment for the first time went over 2,000. In September of 1962, they purchased the land up on what's now the upper campus. In the fall of 1962, they introduced computers for scheduling classes. In the 62-63 year was when the first graduate students started earning their degrees. In October of 1962, the first field hockey team was established, and in February of 1963, the very first women's basketball games were held. In the spring of 1963, the Letterman, which was a more recent popular singing group, came to campus, and so that was sort of the beginning of a little broadening of the entertainment that students were getting here.
The first suit I had was bought because I had to have a suit to go to college. And we ate in the Commons in the evening, and you wore coat and tie. And the food was served by waiters, which were students. And believe me, you were on your best behavior when you were in the Commons. It was very formal, but it was part of the indoctrination of what you needed to do as far as the image you needed to project to be a teacher.
There were restrictions. Even if you were of legal drinking age, you could not drink. However, smoking was certainly fine. You could smoke almost anywhere on campus. The student newspaper, almost every issue, would have a large ad advertising cigarettes. That they had no problem with, but they did not want you to drink. In that time period, the major sport that actually on campus was wrestling. We
were part of the only undefeated team that Bloomsburg's ever had in wrestling. We used to give the basketball team a hard time because they'd have a fairly good crowd, but for the wrestling matches, we basically jammed in beyond what the fire marshal would allow. They sat completely around the mats.
In the spring of '63, contracts were awarded, and they began building 2 new dormitories. They became East Hall and West Hall.
We had one girls' dorm and one boys' dorm. In the girls' dorm, I think there were like 200 or 250 girls in that, and then there were 50 of us in the boys' dorm. And the boys' dorm was rather interesting. The
rules the women were under were much more restrictive than the men. They had to sign in and out. They wanted to know where you were at all times, strict curfews.
We that were members of the North Hall Brigade decided that we were going to do a visit to the women's dorm, the girls' dorm. And we got about halfway there, and we recognized the fact that we were putting our whole college careers in jeopardy. And so we decided the better part of valor was to throw the towel in and retreat. But today, you know, you have, you know, they live in apartments and you're together, and so that's a major difference. I think just seeing the people, most of the people that I will hope will come back are people that we haven't seen for 50 years. Our wives have heard all the stories, and so now that we have a chance to tell them to each other again. For a lot of the people never been back on campus, I think it's going to amaze them. The football field was where your quad is now. Centennial Gymnasium was where we wrestled, and the wrestling matches were the event here in the winter. It was a different time. Those of us who are going to be here, we're going to have a good time. That's what it's all about. Well, they better come back because we're going to talk about them, and they better be here to defend themselves.